For most of her life, Lydia Romero had been the girl people crossed the street to avoid. In their small corner of El Paso, neighbors whispered her name with a kind of wary respect, as though speaking too loudly might summon the version of her they all remembered. Strong, unpredictable, frightening in ways they never dared to articulate. Hannah, her identical twin, moved through the world like a soft breeze. Lydia, people said, was the storm. The moment that sealed Lydia's fate happened when they were 16. It was late afternoon, the sun dropping low behind the duplexes, when Hannah's terrified scream split the air. Lydia ran toward the sound and found a man twice her size forcing Hannah into a narrow alley behind the grocery store. She didn't hesitate. She grabbed his arm, twisted it with a force she didn't know she possessed, and a sickening crack echoed off the brick walls. The man collapsed, screaming. Hannah sobbed into Lydia's shoulder, and the neighbors who had witnessed it, people who should have thanked her, stared instead with horror, as if Lydia were the danger, not the man on the ground. Their parents reacted the same way. They weren't worried about Hannah. They were afraid of Lydia, afraid of what she might do next, afraid of a strength they didn't understand. Within a month, without warning, they committed her to El Paso State Behavioral Health Center, signing the papers with trembling hands. Lydia remembered the way her mother avoided her eyes. Her father didn't say goodbye at all. The psychiatric ward became her world. 10 long years inside a white room that smelled of bleach and resignation. Lydia was given medication she didn't need, watched by nurses who treated her like a ticking bomb. Days bled into one another, but she didn't break, not the way they expected. She read every book she could get her hands on. She strengthened her body with careful, silent routines. She thought endlessly about what happened, about Hannah, about the life stolen from her. Hannah visited once in the beginning. She cried, apologized, promised she would come back. Lydia remembered brushing her tears away, telling her it wasn't her fault. Hannah had always been gentle, too gentle, timid where Lydia was sharp, soft where Lydia was fire. They had identical faces, but the world responded to them as if they were opposites. And in that sterile room, year after year, Lydia held on to the truth no one else dared to see. She wasn't unstable. She wasn't dangerous without cause. She was a girl who had defended her sister and been punished for it. Beneath all the silence and white walls, her rage waited. Not wild, not reckless, just tightly coiled and patient, like a storm forced into a bottle. The summer heat in El Paso could press down like a hand on the back of your neck, thick, merciless, impossible to ignore. That afternoon, when the psychiatric ward doors opened and Hannah Romero stepped inside, Lydia knew immediately that something was wrong. Hannah was thinner than Lydia remembered. Her shoulders hunched as if carrying a weight no one else could see. She wore a long-sleeved cardigan despite the triple-digit heat, and her steps were small, hesitant, as though she wasn't sure she belonged in her own skin anymore. Lydia stood from the edge of her narrow bed. 10 years had taught her to read people with frightening accuracy, and the moment her sister lifted her head, Lydia saw the emptiness in her eyes, a hollow, vacant look that hadn't existed before. Hannah's hands shook as she tucked her hair behind her ear, and the movement exposed just enough of her cheekbone for Lydia to notice the faint yellowing bruise beneath her makeup. Hannah. Lydia's voice was calm, but it carried an undercurrent of steel. What happened? I just fell, Hannah whispered. Her gaze dropped to the floor, as if the linoleum tiles might help her hold the lie together. Lydia approached slowly, not wanting Hannah to flinch. Look at me. Hannah didn't. She froze, stiff as a frightened animal. Lydia reached out and gently touched her wrist. Even through the fabric, she felt her sister recoil. Lydia lifted the sleeve before Hannah could stop her. What she uncovered made the room tilt. Dark belt marks banded Hannah's forearm, angry and swollen. Smaller burns round Deliberate, speckled her skin like a constellation of cruelty. Finger-shaped bruises trailed up her upper arm, each one a silent testimony of force. Lydia pulled the sleeve higher. More marks, more damage, more truth than Hannah could ever hide. Hannah broke. She collapsed forward, gripping Lydia's shirt, her sobs muffled against her sister's shoulder. Words tumbled out between gasps. Marco. Rosa. Carmen. I can't do anything right. They won't stop. They won't let me breathe. Lydia held her, steady and silent, letting Hannah empty herself. The story unfurled in jagged pieces. Marco Delgado, Hannah's husband, had turned from charming to volatile within the first year of marriage. His mother, Rosa, treated Hannah like a live-in servant, barking orders, criticizing everything. His sister, Carmen, joined in, mocking her, taking from her, berating her in front of the family. And then there was Carmen's son, Mateo, cruel in the careless way children can be when raised without tenderness, who tormented little Eliana just because no one stopped him. But nothing pierced Lydia as sharply as the next sentence. Marco hit her, Hannah whispered. He hit Eliana. Lydia felt something inside her tighten, something she had kept locked away for a decade. She stepped back enough to look into Hannah's face, to see the truth written there in trembling pupils and tear-streaked cheeks. He hit your daughter, Lydia repeated, her voice low, nearly soundless. Hannah nodded. Shame and terror twisting together. Lydia's hands curled into fists at her sides. 10 years in confinement had taught her to restrain her fury, but this was different. This was blood. This was Hannah. This was a 3-year-old child. And as Lydia stared the bruises on her sister's body, the storm she had kept buried since 16 finally began to rise again, slow and inevitable. Hannah's confession didn't come in a clean, linear story. It spilled out in fragments, each one darker than the last, as though she had been holding the words in her throat for years, and now couldn't stop them from tearing their way out. It started with Marco's gambling. Small bets at first, then bigger ones he couldn't afford. He lost money, lost control, and came home seething with frustration. When Hannah tried to calm him, he snapped. The outbursts became routine. A slammed door one night, a thrown plate the next. And when the anger needed a soft target, he found one in her. Rosa Delgado only made it worse. She strutted around the cramped duplex like a commander issuing orders, treating Hannah not as a daughter-in-law, but as a full-time maid. Hannah did the cooking, the cleaning, the laundry, the errands, anything Rosa didn't feel like doing. And if the floor wasn't spotless or dinner wasn't ready by the second Rosa demanded it, the insults came sharp and fast. Carmen joined in whenever she visited. Hannah described her with a tremble in her voice, a woman who lived on bitterness, who mocked Hannah's clothes, her parenting, her silence. And Mateo, Carmen's son, absorbed the cruelty like a sponge. He shoved little Eliana out of the way, snatched toys from her hands, and laughed when she cried because no adult ever corrected him. But the moment that shattered Hannah completely happened 2 weeks earlier. Marco, drunk and furious from losing a bet, stormed into the living room where Eliana had been coloring quietly on the floor. He tripped over her crayons, cursed, and struck the toddler across the back before she even understood what was happening. When Hannah screamed and lunged to protect her daughter, he grabbed her by the hair and dragged her into the bathroom. He slammed her head against the porcelain sink so hard she saw stars. She woke up on the tile floor to Rosa yelling at her for causing a scene. Telling Lydia all of this seemed to drain every ounce of strength from her. She fell silent, staring down at her shaking hands. Lydia stood and walked to the small mirror bolted to the wall. Hannah's reflection hovered behind her. Same height, same build, same eyes, same cheekbones. Identical in every way except one. The life carved into Hannah's face was all fear. In Lydia's, something colder and sharper glinted back. She turned slowly. We're switching places. Hannah blinked, confused. Lydia, no. You can't. You look like me. I look like you. They won't question it. Lydia's voice was steady, almost eerily calm. You stay here. Safe. I'll walk out as you. Hannah shook her head, panic rising. Lydia, they'll hurt you. Marco, Rosa, Carmen, they won't lay a hand on me, Lydia said. Not once. Hannah reached for her, desperate. I can't let you do this. You already did, Lydia whispered, when you walked through those doors. Her resolve was immovable, solid as the concrete walls that had caged her for 10 years. And in Hannah's terrified eyes, Lydia saw both the plea to stop and the hope that she wouldn't. When the doors of the psychiatric ward slid open, Lydia Romero stepped into the Texas sun as if emerging from another lifetime. The heat struck her first, heavy, bright, almost violent after a decade spent beneath fluorescent lights. The noise followed, traffic humming along the highway, voices drifting from the parking lot. The distant wail of a siren. Ordinary sounds, but to her they felt enormous. For a moment, she just stood there, eyes narrowed against the glare, lungs expanding with a freedom she had nearly forgotten how to breathe. She walked with Hannah's worn purse slung over her shoulder, each step deliberate. The city felt different than she remembered. Louder, faster, more chaotic. Or maybe it was just that Lydia was no longer the 16-year-old girl who had been dragged away from her life. She had spent 10 years waiting for this moment. 10 years planning what she would do if she ever got another chance. The bus ride to Hannah's neighborhood took her deeper into the outskirts of El Paso, where the paint peeled from sunburned houses and chain-link fences sagged under their own weight. When she stepped off the bus, she recognized the kind of place where people tried to survive, not thrive. Cramped duplexes lined the street, windows cracked, front yards littered with broken toys, fast food wrappers and plastic bags that fluttered like tattered flags in the dry wind. Lydia approached the Delgados' home, a duplex that looked worse up close. A sour smell seeped from the cracked door frame, and the paint had chipped away to reveal swollen, water-damaged wood. She slipped inside without knocking. The stench hit immediately. Mold clung to the ceiling corners. The carpet was stained beyond recognition. Dirty dishes piled in the sink, attracting flies that buzzed lazily through the stale air. It was the kind of neglect that took time to accumulate, the kind that only existed when no one cared, no one tried. But the filth wasn't what stopped Lydia. It was the small figure in the living room corner. Eliana sat on the floor with her knees tucked to her chest, a headless doll crushed protectively to her chest. Her dark curls hung in messy strands around her face. When she heard the door, she didn't look up at first, just pressed herself harder against the wall, as if hoping to disappear into it. When she finally lifted her eyes, they were wide, watery, and full of a fear no child her age should ever know. Lydia crouched slowly, keeping her voice soft. Eliana, it's me. But the little girl flinched, shrinking away, her tiny shoulders trembling. She didn't recognize this version of her mother, the strong posture, the steady gaze. She only recognized danger, because danger was all she had known. Lydia's chest tightened. She had seen bruises on Hannah's skin, but this was different. This was what fear looked like when it lived inside a child. In that moment, Lydia's mission shifted from determination to something sharper, deeper. Not just for Hannah, not just for herself. For this child who had learned to brace for pain every time the door opened. Lydia had barely taken 2 steps toward Eliana when the front door slammed open behind her. The sound cracked through the duplex like a gunshot. There you are, Rosa Delgado barked, her voice sharp enough to cut. Standing around while this place looks like a pigsty, typical Hannah. She tossed her purse onto the couch, glaring at Lydia with open contempt. Did you cook? Did you clean? Or did you spend the whole day being useless like always? Lydia didn't move. She simply turned her head, meeting Rosa's glare with a calm, unreadable expression, one Hannah had never been capable of holding. Before Rosa could fire off another insult, Carmen stepped in, dragging her son Mateo behind her. Carmen's smirk was smug, practiced, the smirk of someone who had enjoyed years of easy dominance. "Well, look who's alive," Carmen drawled. "I swear, Hannah, you get lazier every day." She nudged Mateo forward. "Go get your cousin's toy. She doesn't need it." Mateo didn't hesitate. He marched toward Eliana, ripped the headless doll from her arms, and shoved her so hard she fell sideways on the carpet. Eliana whimpered, rubbing her arm. Carmen snorted. "Don't cry, Eliana. God, she's so dramatic." Rosa chimed in. "She gets it from her mother." Lydia moved. Not fast, but with purpose. She reached down, caught Mateo by the wrist just as he lifted the doll to throw it. Her grip tightened slowly, deliberately. Mateo froze. "Let go!" he screeched as Lydia's fingers dug into his skin. His face contorted, shock shifting into pain. "Mom, she's hurting me." Carmen rushed forward, fury flashing across her features. "Hannah, have you lost your mind?" She swung her arm to yank Mateo free. Lydia countered effortlessly, twisting Carmen's arm behind her back in one controlled motion. The pop of tendons, tightening, filled the room. Carmen gasped, stumbling forward as Lydia bent her at the waist, immobilizing her. "Let my son go!" Carmen shrieked, her voice cracking as pain shot up her shoulder. "Maybe," Lydia murmured, her tone cold, "you should teach him not to hurt little girls." Rosa grabbed the nearest object, a broom leaning against the wall, and charged. "You filthy ingrate," she spat. "I'll teach you some respect." The broom swung through the air, but Lydia caught it mid-strike. Her fingers tightened around the handle, and with one sharp movement, she snapped the wooden shaft cleanly in half. The crack reverberated through the small living room like a warning shot. Silence fell. Carmen stopped struggling. Mateo's screams choked off into stunned hiccups. Rosa stumbled backward, the broken broom still clutched in her trembling hand. For the first time in years, the Delgados looked at Hannah and didn't see the timid, apologetic woman they had conditioned into servitude. They saw someone else, someone they did not know how to control. Rosa's voice wavered. What's gotten into you?" Lydia released Carmen, let Mateo's wrist go, and stood between the family and the trembling child on the floor. Nothing about her expression softened, and in that moment, the Delgados understood one terrifying truth. This was not the Hannah they used to dominate. This was someone far more dangerous. The Delgados avoided Lydia for the rest of the afternoon, whispering among themselves in the hallway like animals trying to understand a new predator. Lydia didn't bother listening. She moved through the kitchen with quiet focus, opening drawers, checking the pantry, inspecting the refrigerator stocked with food she knew Hannah was never allowed to touch. She found the pack of cheap frozen fish fillets Rosa favored. Dry, thin, nearly tasteless unless deliberately ruined. Hannah had once told her in a broken whisper that Rosa always burned them on purpose and drowned them in salt, forcing her to eat every bite while the family enjoyed real meals. So Lydia did exactly that. She let the pan scorch until smoke curled toward the ceiling. She tossed the fillets in, letting them sizzle and blacken at the edges. Then she grabbed the salt shaker and emptied it with slow, methodical shakes, watching the crystals coat the fish in a thick white layer. When she set the plates on the table, Rosa wrinkled her nose. "What on earth is this?" "Dinner," Lydia said simply. Carmen rolled her eyes. "You didn't even try, Hannah. This is disgusting." "Eat," Lydia replied. Rosa opened her mouth to argue, but Lydia's stare sliced through her words. Something in that gaze, steady, cold, unblinking, made Rosa hesitate. She picked up her fork with a trembling hand, scraped off a piece of the charred, salt-caked fish, and forced it into her mouth. The moment she swallowed, she gagged. God! Rosa coughed violently, reaching for water. This is inedible. That's strange, Lydia said softly. You made Hannah finish every bite. Carmen pushed her plate away. I'm not eating this crap. Lydia didn't warn her. The slap landed with a sharp crack that echoed through the kitchen. Carmen's head snapped to the side, her hand flying to her cheek as it reddened instantly. Her eyes filled with stunned tears, not from pain alone, but from shock that anyone had dared lay a hand on her. Rosa froze mid-cough, staring at Lydia as if seeing a ghost. Lydia didn't look at either of them. She was already moving toward Eliana, who sat silently in the corner, small and afraid, watching everything with wide, untrusting eyes. Lydia knelt beside her, opened the refrigerator again, and pulled out a container of leftover chicken and rice, real food untouched, clearly saved for the adults. She warmed it quickly in the microwave and set the bowl gently in front of the child. For you, she whispered. Eliana hesitated, glancing toward her grandmother, an aunt as if expecting punishment. When none came, she lifted the spoon with trembling hands. The first bite seemed to shock her, a real flavor, a warmth her tiny body had forgotten. Tears pooled in her lashes as she ate faster, then slower, then faster again, as if unsure if the meal might disappear. Lydia watched her, jaw tightening. This was a child who had learned to starve, quietly. Behind them, Rosa wheezed and Carmen whimpered, holding her swollen cheek. And for the first time, Lydia felt the household shifting, tilting away from cruelty and toward reckoning. The front door burst open a little after 9, rattling the loose hinges. Heavy footsteps staggered across the threshold, followed by the sour stench of cheap beer and sweat. Marco Delgado was home. Hannah, he bellowed, voice thick with drunken arrogance. Get over here. Now. I said now. Lydia didn't move from where she stood in the hallway. She watched him lurch past the living room, his shirt half untucked, his eyes bloodshot, his jaw clenched in that familiar, entitled rage Hannah had described. When Marco finally saw her, he sneered. There you are. What, you deaf now? He swayed closer, jabbing a finger at her chest. I told you to clean this rotten place, and dinner tasted like trash. You want to get smart with me now. Rosa and Carmen peeked from the kitchen doorway, tense, waiting for the usual spectacle. Hannah shrinking, apologizing, bracing for the blow. Marco lifted his hand. The slap never landed. Lydia caught his wrist in midair, her fingers locking around it like steel. Marco froze, confusion flickering through his drunken haze. What are you? Let go, he snapped, tugging his arm. Lydia didn't let go. She squeezed. Marco's face twisted as pain shot up his arm. What the Hannah, stop. Are you crazy? She yanked his arm downward, spinning him with a precision that belonged to someone who had lived 10 years studying movement, leverage, and the anatomy of violence. His shoulder wrenched, sending him stumbling into the hallway wall with a loud thud. Rosa gasped. Carmen covered her mouth. Lydia didn't pause. Marco swung blindly with his free hand, roaring. You stupid! She grabbed his shirt collar, slammed him against the opposite wall hard enough to rattle the picture frames. The drywall groaned under the force. Marco's eyes went wide, confusion giving way to real fear. Stop! Stop! What's wrong with you? Everything you did, Lydia said quietly, is about to come back to you. She shoved him toward the bathroom. He tripped over the doorway threshold and crashed onto the tile. Lydia was on him before he could scramble up. She seized the back of his head, forcing his face toward the sink. Marco clawed at her wrists. No, wait, Hannah. Please. But Lydia wasn't Hannah. She turned on the faucet, water thundering into the basin, steam rising. With one brutal motion, she plunged his head into the water. Marco thrashed violently, his muffled screams swallowed by the sink. Water splashed across the counter, the mirror, the floor. Lydia held him there, just long enough for panic to replace fury. He kicked, choked, jerked against her grip. She lifted his head for a single, gasping breath. Enough to let him realize she wasn't finished, then shoved him under again. Behind her, Rosa and Carmen stood frozen at the doorway, eyes wide, bodies trembling. The broom handle incident had shaken them. This terrified them. They were finally witnessing what Hannah had endured, only reversed. Lydia leaned close to Marco's ear as he sputtered and choked. This is what it feels like when someone stronger decides your fear doesn't matter. Marco bimpered, the fight draining out of him. Water dripped from his hair onto the tile. Lydia released him at last, letting him collapse against the sink, coughing violently, soaking wet. Powerless. He looked up at her with pure, undiluted terror. For the first time, Marco Delgado understood he was not the predator in this house anymore. He was the prey. The house was silent after the bathroom fight, an unnatural, heavy silence, the kind that settles after a storm but carries the threat of another. Marco crouched on the floor, drenched and trembling, coughing water from his lungs. Rosa hovered near him, too afraid to touch him, too shocked to speak. Carmen stood frozen by the hallway, clutching Mateo's arm as though anchoring herself to something solid. Lydia walked past all of them without a word. She headed into Rosa's bedroom, into the woman's private space, a room Hannah had always been forbidden to enter unless it was to clean. Clothes lay in piles, drawers half open, dust coating the carpet. Lydia opened the hamper. The stench hit instantly. Old sweat, spoiled fabric, neglect. She sifted through the pile until she found what she was looking for. Rosa's dirtiest undergarments, stained and balled into stiff knots. She lifted them with 2 fingers, her expression unreadable, and carried them back to the kitchen. Rosa followed at a distance, voice shaky. "W, what are you doing with those?" "Put them back." "Hannah," I said. Lydia opened a cabinet, pulled out a dented metal pot, and filled it with water from the tap. Rosa's voice cracked. "No, no, 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 don't you dare." Lydia dropped the undergarments into the pot. They splashed into the cloudy water like something rotten returning to its swamp. Carmen gagged. "What is wrong with you?" Lydia turned on the burner. The flame flared blue. Marco staggered into the doorway, still dripping, eyes wide with confusion. Lydia didn't look at him. She simply lifted the pot lid, letting the heat rise, letting the water darken as the fabric boiled. Rosa's scream pierced the room. "Stop it! Stop! That's disgusting! You crazy!" Lydia didn't raise her voice. "Hannah told me everything you made her do." Rosa's mouth snapped shut. The pot hissed, the water turning murky brown. The smell filled the kitchen, thick and nauseating. When Lydia finally turned off the burner, she poured the mixture into a chipped mug. Marco backed away, shaking his head violently. "No, no way." "I'm not." Lydia stepped toward him. He tripped over his own feet as he scrambled backward, but hit the wall with nowhere left to go. She pressed the mug into his hands. He refused. She tightened her grip around his wrist until his knuckles cracked. "Drink," she said. Rosa screamed again, lunging forward. But Lydia shot her a warning, looked so cold that Rosa froze mid-step. Marco's hands trembled violently. The mug rattled against his teeth as he lifted it because he understood, finally, that resisting would end far worse. He drank. The gagging, the retching, the horror on his face, it all happened at once. He spat, choked, clawed at his tongue as if trying to erase the filth. Carmen covered her mouth in shock. Rosa kept screaming. Mateo cried, but Marco broke. The fight left his eyes. His shoulders sagged. His breath came in shallow gasps as he stared at Lydia with something beyond fear. submission, realization. This was not the Hannah he had beaten, controlled, or terrorized. This was someone he would never be able to dominate again. And in that moment, Marco Delgado, tyrant of his home, tormentor of a wife and child, felt the full weight of humiliation he had spent years inflicting on others, served back to him in one brutal, unforgettable gulp. The morning came gray and silent, the air thick with the sour aftertaste of the previous night. Lydia slept lightly, if at all, stretched out on the worn couch where she could see every entrance. Marco had spent the night in his room with the door locked, flinching at every creak of the floorboards. Rosa and Carmen whispered in the kitchen like prisoners planning an escape. At 8:17 a.m., a loud knock rattled the front door. 3 sharp, authoritative bangs. "Police department," a male voice called. Marco rushed out of his room, wild-eyed and desperate. Finally, thank God you're here." He flung the door open dramatically. 2 uniformed officers stepped inside. Officer Kent, tall and balding, and Officer Ramirez, a Latina woman with sharp eyes that missed nothing. Marco pointed at Lydia, like a child tattling to a teacher. "Arrest her. She attacked me last night. She went crazy. She tried to drown me." Officer Kent glanced at Marco's bruised wrist, the scratches on his arms, the soaked shirt clinging to his body. "Okay, sir, slow down. You're saying she assaulted you?" "Yes." "Marcos Chautith. She's unstable. She snapped. She's dangerous." Officer Ramirez looked at Lydia, who stood with her arms relaxed at her sides, posture straight, gaze steady. No fear, no panique, just control. "Ma'am," Ramirez said calmly, "do you want to tell us what happened?" Before Lydia could answer, Rosa jumped in. "She's lying. She's been acting strange, out of her mind. She slapped Carmen. She hurt Mateo. She tried to poison the whole family." "Poison?" Gent repeated, skeptical. "It was a misunderstanding," Carmen stammered, touching her still swollen cheek. "But she's dangerous. She needs to be taken away." Lydia spoke then, softly, clearly. "I have medical records, photos, reports." Ramirez's eyes sharpened. "Medical records?" "Yes," Lydia said. "My sister, Hannah, has been treated multiple times for trauma injuries, visites, concussions, bruised ribs. She has 3 documented instances of calling 911 but hanging up before speaking. She was too afraid to follow through." Marco's face blanched. "That's not. She fell. She's clumsy. She has cigarette burns," Lydia continued. "Belt marks. Finger-shaped bruises. Photos from the urgent care in Isleta from last month. And witnesses, nurses who documented her fear." Carmen choked on her breath. Rosa's hand flew to her mouth. Officer Kent exchanged a slow, meaningful look with Officer Ramirez. "We'll need to see those records," Ramirez said. Lydia stepped into the bedroom, Hannah's old hiding place, and retrieved the thick envelope she discovered the night before. Hannah had kept everything. Every hospital bill, every medical report, every photo she was too afraid to show anyone. Lydia handed the envelope to the officers. Ramirez flipped through the contents, her expression shifting from curiosity to concern to unmistakable recognition. "These injuries weren't caused by falling," she said quietly. Gent nodded. "This is years of documented abuse. Marco es putered. This is an ambush. She's setting me up." Ramirez's voice dropped into an even, serious tone. "Sir, your injuries are superficial. Hers," she held up one of the urgent care photos showing Hannah's purple cheekbone and swollen eye, "are severe, repetitive, and consistent with assault." Rosa and Carmen exchanged panic glances. The balance of power shifted visibly. Officer Kent straightened. "Until we sort this out, We strongly advise all of you not to interfere with her or the child. Any intimidation will be considered obstruction. Marco's jaw dropped. You're taking her side? We're taking the side of the evidence, Ramirez replied. And in that moment, standing in their own kitchen, Rosa, Carmen, and Marco finally understood. Their stories no longer protected them. Their lies no longer controlled the narrative. And the woman they once called powerless now held every advantage. The Delgados barely waited for the police cruiser to turn the corner before collapsing into a frantic huddle in the kitchen. Their whispers ricocheted off the dirty tile walls. Urgent, sharp, trembling with something new. Fear. Rosa's voice cracked first. That is not Hannah. I don't care what she looks like. She's not her. Carmen nodded quickly, rubbing the cheek still tender from Lydia's slap. She's stronger. Different. Cold. Hannah couldn't even raise her voice. Marco leaned against the counter, still pale, his hair damp from the previous night. I know who she is, he muttered. I know exactly who. Rosa snapped, then say it. He swallowed hard. Lydia, Hannah's twin, the crazy one, the one they locked up in that asylum. Silence hung heavy for a moment as the reality took shape in all their minds. Carmen whispered, horrified, she took Hannah's place, and Hannah's in the ward right now, pretending to be her. Rosa clutched the counter for support. We have to fix this. If the police figure out the switch, if they find out what we've done, they won't, Marco hissed, his voice dangerously thin. Not if she's back in the hospital before anyone questions it. He glanced toward the living room, where Lydia sat with Eliana, gently braiding the child's hair as if nothing were brewing behind the kitchen walls. Carmen lowered her voice even further. How? We can't overpower her. Did you see what she did to you? To me? Marco's jaw tightened. We'll drug her. Rosa blinked. What? We'll put the pills in her soup. Knock her out. Tie her up. Call the psychiatric hospital and tell them she escaped. Rosa's hands trembled. And they'll take her back forever. Carmen smirked, her fear twisting into bitterness. Good. Let them deal with her. Then Mateo, standing nearby, whispered, but she'll know the soup tastes weird. Marco's eyes slid toward Eliana. Then we give it to the kid first. If she drinks it, the crazy one won't suspect anything. Even Rosa flinched at that. Marco, she's 3. Marco snapped. Do you want to go to jail? Do you want CPS here? Because that girl, Hannah. Lydia, whoever, she's ruining everything. Fear won over conscience. It always had with this family. They moved quickly. Marco crushed the pills. Carmen stirred them into the pot of soup. Rosa ladled a small bowl for Eliana. Rosa forced a smile, carrying the steaming bowl toward the child. Sweetie, dinner time. But Lydia's eyes flicked up. She watched the 2 bright smiles, the stiffness in their movements, the way every Delgado I tracked her instead of the toddler. Something was wrong. She stood, walked over, and reached for the bowl. I'll feed her. Rosa stiffened. No. I can do it. Lydia didn't give her the chance. She accidentally bumped her hip against the counter. The bowl tipped. Hot soup splashed across the floor, dripping down the cabinet fronts, pooling under Rosa's feet. Rosa shrieked. Marco cursed. Carmen looked ready to cry. The plan was gone in an instant. Lydia fixed her gaze on them, slow, deliberate. That was careless, she said, voice eerily calm. Rosa backed away until she hit the wall. Mateo hid behind his mother. Marco swallowed hard, his facade cracking. Their desperation, their cruelty, their unraveling panic filled the room like smoke. And Lydia saw, clearly, they weren't trying to escape consequences anymore. They were trying to survive her. The house lay in a thick, unnatural silence at 2 a.m., the hour when only desperation is awake. Lydia had been lying on Hannah's old mattress with her eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. Her body perfectly still. But she wasn't sleeping. She had caught the way Rosa whispered too long on the phone. The way Marco stared at her over dinner like he was calculating odds. The way Carmen had paced the hallway with restless, jittery steps. She knew something was coming. The doorknob turned with a faint scrape. The door eased open. Marco slipped in first, barefoot, holding a rope coiled in his hands. His shadow stretched long across the tile. Carmen followed, clutching a roll of duct tape with shaking fingers. Rosa crept behind them, holding a damp cloth, meant to gag, maybe even suffocate. They moved like a pack of scavengers, circling what they thought was wounded prey. "Is she asleep?" Rosa whispered. Marco leaned forward, squinting at Lydia's unmoving form. "She has to be. We crushed enough pills to knock out a horse." Carmen nodded, creeping closer. "Hurry. Let's tie her before she wakes up." They were 2 steps from the bed when Lydia's eyes opened. Not slowly, not groggily. Wide, alert, cold. Carmen let out a tiny squeak. Lydia moved. She kicked off the mattress, the force knocking Carmen backward, so hard she slammed into the wall. The duct tape flying from her hands. Before Marco could raise the rope, Lydia grabbed the bedside lamp and cracked it across his forearm. The bulb shattered in an explosion of glass. Marco screamed, dropping the rope as he stumbled to his knees. Rosa lunged with the cloth, shrieking, "Hold her down!" Lydia twisted sharply, caught Rosa's wrist, and used the woman's momentum to flip her onto the bed. Rosa gasped as Lydia's arm locked around her throat in a tight chokehold. Not enough to cut off air entirely, but enough to remind her who held power now. Carmen tried to crawl toward the door. Lydia released Rosa just long enough to grab Carmen by the ankle, dragging her across the floor like dead weight. Carmen kicked, panicked, clawing at the carpet. "Let go! Let go!" Lydia didn't. She hauled Carmen to the center of the room, then turned on Marco, who was scrambling backward, clutching his throbbing arm. "Stay back," he cried. "Hannah, Lydia, whoever you are, stay away!" But he'd invaded her room. He'd brought rope. He'd planned to take her freedom. Again. Lydia grabbed him by the shirt collar, yanked him to his feet, and slammed him against the wall so hard the drywall cracked. His breath left him in a wheezing gasp. Now all 3 Delgados were writhing on the floor, Carmen moaning, Rosa clutching her bruised throat, Marco shuddering in fear. Lydia stood over them, breathing steady, her silhouette sharp against the dim hallway light. She didn't scream, didn't threaten. She simply grabbed each of them by the arm, one by one, and dragged them into the living room, their bodies scraping against the dirty tile. "Marco Bimpered," Carmen sobbed. Rosa prayed under her breath. When she finished, the 3 of them lay in a pathetic, tangled heap at her feet, like defeated prey hauled back by a silent, tireless hunter. And Lydia Romero stood above them, unshaken, unbreakable, and fully in control. The 3 Delgados lay sprawled on the living room floor, panting, bruised, and trembling. Lydia watched them with the same calm focus she used to study people in the ward, calculating, waiting for the moment fear turned to panic. It didn't take long. Marco groaned, clutching his ribs. What do you want from us?" Lydia tilted her head. "Nothing yet, but you should worry about what's happening in the bedroom." Carmen's breath hitched. What do you mean?" I tied Marco up," Lydia said quietly, "before you 3 even came for me. Did you really think you surprised me?" Rosa stared at her, eyes wide. Tied him up?" Lydia nodded slowly. "He's in the bedroom, and I didn't tie him well. He's breaking free." Carmen's face drained of color. No, that's not possible. Marco is right here." Lydia didn't blink. "Then, who do you think I dragged down the hall earlier?" Rosa whipped her head toward Marco, panic swallowing reason. Did she knock you out at some point? Did she, Marco? Did you black out?" Marco stuttered, unable to form an answer. His confusion only fed their terror. Lydia continued, voice low and eerily measured. If I were you, I'd hurry. He's angry, violent, thrashing, and whoever gets in his way now, he'll tear apart. Rosa's hands flew to her mouth. Carmen started shaking, so hard she dropped the lamp base she'd grabbed as a weapon. We have to stop him, Rosa whispered, before he hurts Mateo, before he kills us. Carmen grabbed a broomstick. Rosa picked up a frying pan. Lydia stepped aside without a word. The two women raced toward the bedroom, hearts pounding, the sound of their frantic footsteps echoing off the walls. Lydia followed at a slow, deliberate pace. Inside the bedroom, a large figure lay tied on the bed, blankets wrapped around him, limbs secured. His face was turned away, hair covering his features. He struggled weakly, groaning. Carmen screamed, "He's breaking out! Hit him!" Rosa swung first. The frying pan connected with a sickening thud. "Stop! Wait! Stop!" the figure roared. Too late. Carmen leapt onto the bed, striking him again and again with the broomstick. Rosa beat him across the back and shoulders. Shrieking hysterically, the blankets fell away. Marco's face twisted toward them, shocked, terrified, bleeding. "Mom! Carmen! It's me, stop! It's me!" Rosa froze mid-swing. Carmen's broomstick dropped from her hands. Their screams collapsed into horrified silence. Marco lay tied, bruised, gasping, staring at them as if they were monsters. Rosa staggered backward, clutching her chest. "No, no! What did we do?" Carmen fell to her knees, sobbing. "We thought," she said, "you were." Marco's voice cracked into a broken whisper. "You tried to kill me." And from the doorway, Lydia leaned against the frame, watching them unravel. Rosa shaking, Carmen wailing, Marco terrified of the very people he'd once controlled. She didn't smile. She didn't speak. She simply let them drown in the chaos they had created. This time, they weren't victims of her strength. They were victims of their own fear. The room erupted the moment Marco's screams died into ragged, humiliated breaths. Rosa stumbled backward, hands shaking uncontrollably, while Carmen stared at her own fingers as if they belonged to someone else. The three of them, once a unified front of cruelty, now looked like cornered animals trapped with no way out. Then the shouting began. "This is your fault!" Carmen screamed at Rosa, her voice cracking under the weight of panic. "You raised him like this. You taught him to treat people like garbage." Rosa's face twisted into something feral. "Don't you dare blame me. You're the one who encouraged him. You and that spoiled brat of yours. Always here. Always stirring trouble." "Me?" Carmen shrieked, slapping Rosa across the arm. "You're out of your mind." Marco, still tied to the bed, strained against the ropes, his face contorted with pain and rage. "Untie me. Untie me right now. Look at what you two did to me." Carmen rounded on him, eyes wide with accusation. "We did it because," she said, "because she told us. You listened to her?" Marco roared, spittle flying. "You believed her over me?" Rosa slapped Marco's leg, her voice pitching upward. "You idiot. If you hadn't called the police, none of this would have happened. You provoked her. You protected her before." Carmen threw back. "You always protected her. You let Hannah walk all over you. That wasn't Hannah." Marco screamed, veins bulging at his temples. And with that, the room combusted. Carmen lunged forward and clawed at Rosa's shoulder. Rosa retaliated, slapping Carmen so hard she fell sideways onto the bed, on top of Marco, who screeched as her weight hit his bruises. He lashed out, kicking wildly. Carmen shrieked, grabbed his hair, and yanked. Rosa slapped her again. Marco swung an elbow. Someone screamed. Years, decades of resentment exploded at once. You ruined this family. You never respected me. You're weak. You're evil. You raised a monster. You are the monster. The insults collided in the air like broken glass. The three abusers tore into one another in a way they had never dared before, because their favorite target was no longer at their mercy. Not Hannah, not Lydia, not the child, just each other. In the doorway, Lydia stood still as stone, holding Eliana against her hip. The little girl's arms clung tightly around her neck, her head tucked beneath Lydia's chin. Lydia kept a steady hand on her back, her presence a silent shield against the chaos in the room. She watched not with joy, not with pity, but with a cold, quiet acceptance. This was what happened when predators were forced to face themselves. Rosa was the first to collapse, emotionally, not physically. She froze mid-scream. Her fingers clawed into Marco's sleeve. Her eyes widened, darting to Lydia as if seeing her clearly for the first time. Her voice dropped to a trembling whisper. That's not Hannah. Carmen stopped crying. Marco stopped struggling. Rosa swallowed hard, every word trembling. That's Lydia, the one from the hospital, the one they locked up. Silence fell like a shroud. Lydia didn't deny it. She didn't need to. Her stillness, her strength, the chilling calm in her eyes, all of it told the truth louder than any words could. And that truth landed exactly where the original story ended. Not with a scream, but with a realization so stark it stole the room's remaining breath. They hadn't trapped a victim. They had unleashed Lydia Romero,